Okay, so let's go over our first example. It says here, the width of a rectangle is 9 more than the length. If the perimeter is 50, find the width and length. So the first thing I want you to recognize is we're talking about a rectangle. We're specifically talking about the perimeter of this rectangle in terms of width and length. So I'm going to label these are my two lengths and these are my two widths. Keeping in mind that the perimeter is 50. So what does this mean? Well, it means this length plus this width plus this length plus this width should equal 50. So that's how I'm going to set it up. Now, keeping in mind, what I want to do now is assign a variable to the thing that I know the least about. So in this case, since we're talking about length and width, I'm going to go ahead and say, since I know a little about the width, since it says the width of a rectangle is 9 more than the length, I can go ahead and say that we're going to let L represent, let's use a capital L so that it doesn't look like the number 1. Let L represent the length. So once I've determined this, what I can go ahead and do is label all the lengths L. So this length is going to be L. This length is going to be L as well. Now, the only thing that's missing is the width, but that's okay because we do have some information about the width. The width of the rectangle is 9 more than the length. Now the word 9 more than makes me think that we're going to be adding 9. So that's what I'm going to do. We're going to add 9. But you want to be careful because we're adding 9 to something. What are we adding 9 to? Well, we're adding 9 more than the length. So we're going to add 9 over to the length. What are we calling length? Well, we're calling it L. So I'm going to go ahead and put L plus 9. So now that I have that for my width, since I have another width here, I'm also going to put L plus 9. So now that I have everything figured out, I have length figured out, I have width figured out, I'm going to go ahead and complete my equation and solve. So first things first, I'm going to check if I can distribute. There's nothing to distribute out here, so I'm going to go ahead and do the next best thing, which is combine like terms. I want to indicate that these are all 1Ls, so altogether we have a grand total of 4Ls. But on top of that, we have these plus 9s that we can combine together as well. So that's going to give us 18, and that's going to equal the perimeter, which is 50. So first things first, we're going to go ahead and get rid of this constant. So the inverse of adding 18 would be to subtract 18 from both sides. So that's going to leave us with 4L equals 32. Now let's not forget, this means 4 times L, and the inverse operation of multiplying by 4 is to divide by 4. So dividing both sides by 4, I'm left with L equals 8. So let's not forget, what in the world does L mean? L represents the length. So in this case, I can go ahead and say that the length is 8. Okay, but I'm also interested in figuring out the width. So what's the width? Well, I'm going to go back to what I originally came up with. According to this, we said the width is the length plus 9. So what is the length? It's 8. 8 plus 9 is 17. So I would say the length is 8 and the width is 17. So with that, I went ahead and answered the 2 questions that they had, which was to find the width and the length. Now we're going to go ahead and skip over to example number 4. So go ahead and turn to that page. So it says here, the sum of Ali and Mel's age is 39. If Mel is 3 years younger than twice Ali's age, how old are Ali and Mel? So the first thing I want us to understand is we know that Ali's age plus Mel's age is going to equal, 39, because their ages is the sum. The sum of their ages is 39. Sorry about that. Okay, so now that I have a setup, what I want to do again is assign a variable to the thing I know the least about. And we're doing that because we do have two things that we don't know, Allie and Mel. So in this case, since we're given some information about Mel is 3 years younger than twice Allie's age, I'm going to say I know the least about Allie. So we're going to say let A represent Allie's age. Okay, so now that we have that, I'm going to go ahead and assign Allie's age as A. So all I need to do is figure out how I'm going to write Mel's age. Well, Mel is 3 years younger than twice Allie's age. So let's first start by deciphering 3 years younger than. So 3 years younger than makes me think that we're going to subtract 3. But we're subtracting 3 from something. Okay? So what are we subtracting it from? Well, it's 3 years younger than twice Allie's age. If Allie, we're calling Allie A years old, twice Allie's age would be 2 times A, which is 2A. So now that I figured out Allie's age and Mel's age, what we're going to do is go ahead and complete this equation and solve. So first things first is there's no distribution, so we're going to go straight into combining like terms. We have 1A here, combine that with 2A, leaving us with 3A minus 3 equals 39. So the first thing we want to do is get rid of this constant. So instead of subtracting 3, we're going to do the inverse and add 3 to both sides, leaving us with 3A equals 42. Now the next thing we're going to do is get rid of this coefficient. Since it means 3 times A, the inverse would be to divide both sides by 3, leaving us with A equals 14. Now what is A again? Let's go back. A represents Allie's age, so I can say Allie is 12 years old. Now, we're also interested in Mel's age, so how am I going to figure that? Well, let's go back here. We said Mel's age is 2A minus 3. So I'm going to go ahead and put 2A minus 3. That's going to be Mel's age. We're going to do 2 times A, which is 14. 2 times 14 is 28, but minus 3 is going to give me 25. So how old is Mel? He is 25. So Allie is 12 and Mel is 25. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and skip on to number 6. It says here the perimeter of a rectangle is 78 inches. If the length is 3 more than twice the width, find the width and length of the rectangle. So real quick, let's draw ourselves a quick rectangle. Let's label the 2 lengths and the 2 widths, understanding that the perimeter of this rectangle is 78. So why did I do this? Because when I'm looking for the perimeter, I need to add up all the sides. So I'm going to say the length plus the width plus the length plus the width is going to equal 78. So now that we figured that out, we're going to go ahead and assign a variable. Since we have 2 variables, we want to assign the variable to the thing that we know the least about. That's going to be my tip to you. In this case, since it says the length is 3 more than twice the width, they're giving us information about the width. Sorry, they're giving us information about the length, so I'm going to say I know the least about the width. So let W represent the width. So now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and fill in what I know. Since I'm letting W represent the width, I'm going to go under W and call it the width, and call it W, and call this width W as well. So all I need to do is figure out what I'm going to call L. So going back to the information, it says the length is 3 more than twice the width. So 3 more than makes me think that we're going to be adding 3. So I'm going to put plus 3. But we're adding 3 to something. What are we adding 3 to? Well, we're adding 3 to twice the width. What's the width called? Well, it's called W. So twice the width would be 2 times W. 2 times W is just 2W. So this is what we're going to call the width. this is what we're going to call the length, correction. So we're going to go ahead and do the same thing here. We're going to call this length the same thing, which is 2w plus 3. Now that I have this, I can go ahead and set up the rest of my equation to solve. So there's no distributing that I need to do, so the next best thing is going to be to combine like terms. This is 1w, this is 1w as well, so we have 2, 3, 5, 6 w's all together. Let's also combine the plus 3's, which is going to also be 6, and it should equal 78. So first things first is let's get rid of this constant. So the inverse of adding 6 is to subtract 6 from both sides. So 6w equals 72. Now we're going to get rid of this coefficient. Since this means 6 times w, the inverse operation would be to divide both sides by 6. So w is 72 divided by 6, which is 12. So what is w? Let's go back. W represents the width. So I'm going to say the width is 12. But we're also interested in knowing the length of the rectangle. So let's go back. What did we call the length? We called the length 2w. Sorry, I keep using the wrong word. I think I did. We're calling the length 2w plus 3. That's going to give us length. So we're just going to go ahead and plug in what we know. We're going to do twice the width. So 2 times 12 is 24, but we're going to add 3 to that. So 24 plus 3 is 27. So what's the length? The length is 27. So the length is 27. Okay. Last but not least, we're looking at number 8. It says Chris's allowance is $1 less than twice of Gordon's allowance. Drew's allowance is only half of Gordon's allowance. All three friends together have $51.50. How much does each one get for allowance? So the first thing I want you to understand is if we take Chris's allowance and we add it to Gordon's allowance, and we add it to Drew's allowance, we know that it should equal $51.50. So that's my setup. But it's important, again, to understand what we want to assign a variable to a thing that we know the least about. Well, this one's talking about Chris's allowance, and this one's talking about Drew's allowance. So it seems like the information that we know the least about is regarding Gordon. So I'm going to say let G represent Gordon's allowance. Okay, so now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and say Gordon is going to be G, based off of what I let the variable represent. So now that I have that, what I want to do is fill in the rest. So Chris's allowance is $1 less than twice Gordon's allowance. So $1 less makes me think, $1 less than, makes me think that we're going to be subtracting 1. But we're subtracting 1 from something. What are we subtracting it from? Well, we're subtracting it from twice of Gordon's allowance. So what's Gordon's allowance? Gordon's allowance is G. So twice of G is 2 times G, which I would call 2G. So Chris's expression is going to be 2G minus 1. Now, what about Drew? Well, according to Drew's allowance, it's only half of Gordon's allowance. So I'm going to take half, but half of whose allowance? We're going to take half of Gordon's. Gordon is G, so we're going to take half of G. So now that I have that, I can go ahead and complete the equation and have it equal $51.50. First things first, we're going to check if we can distribute, which we cannot. So next best thing is to combine like terms. We have 2G, 1G, and a half G. So 2 plus 1 is 3. 3 plus a half is 3.5 G's. So 3.5 G's. We're going to keep the minus 1 is going to equal $51.50. So we're going to first get rid of the constant by adding 1 to both sides, leaving me with, I'm going to go ahead and change this to an improper fraction, so 7/2 G equals 5250. Next thing, we're going to get rid of this coefficient, so we're going to divide both sides by 7/2. So we're left with G equals 15. So what does this mean? Gordon's allowance is $15. What about Chris? Chris, we're going to double it. So 2 times 15 is 30. 30 minus 1 is 29. And then for Drew, we're going to take half of Gordon. So half of 15 is $7.50.